My name is Paul Collard. I'm National Director of Creative Partnerships. At its heart, Creative Partnerships is about making education a better experience for young people and making sure that they leave school with a set of skills that are going to set them up properly to be a success in the 21st century. Ultimately, if Creative Partnerships is going to have a long-term impact, then it is going to be an impact on teachers, because we can't forever be in schools doing that. What we have to do is to be able to work with teachers and bring around changes in what they do. If you get the right creative process going and you step on the outside and you're watching people, people are at their most alive when they're doing that. They're completely focused, engaged in this different place. And it's that look of absolute rapt fascination that you get across people's faces that makes it all worthwhile, you think. That's absolutely.
Hi, well, this is the real Paul Collard. The animation that you were watching was made a few years ago by a 16-year-old boy in a high school in the north of England. I'd been visiting the school, which was part of the Creative Partnerships programme at that point, looking at some of the project work that they'd been doing. And at the end, somebody said to me, "Oh, there's this boy making a short film about your programme, and he'd like to ask you a few questions." And I said that was fine, and I went to the school director's office. The boy was there, he had a camera, and he asked me some questions and recorded my answers. And I went away, and I thought no more about it. But about 4 weeks later, I got a DVD in the post, and on it was the animation you just watched. Now, what's significant about this story is a few weeks after that, I was having a meeting with some of the directors of the big advertising agencies in England. Advertising is a very big part of the UK economy now. It generates a lot of jobs, the jobs are lots of fun, and they're very well paid, so everybody wants to work in advertising. And as a result, it's become very competitive to get in. And what's happened is that a lot of young people are now working for up to 2 years as unpaid interns in advertising in order to build up the experience with which they can apply and get even entry-level jobs as a secretary or a receptionist and so forth. And as a consequence of this, the social background of people working in advertising is very much skewing towards children, young people from richer backgrounds, because most of the advertising industry is based in London. To live and work for free in London for 2 years will cost you a lot of money. Unless your parents have money, it's not going to be possible. So we were having a meeting to discuss how we might be able to create fairer pathways into advertising for young people from different places in the country and from poorer backgrounds. And, you know, to be honest, these directors of advertising agencies were not very sympathetic. They said, "We're businessmen, you know, this is social engineering, it's not our job." But towards the end, I said, "Could I show you a video?" And I showed them that animation. And they all wanted the telephone number of the boy immediately, because they wanted to ring him up and offer him a job, because they could see that within a week he could be with clients having amazing ideas. But what was really interesting to me was that they didn't know they wanted that until they saw the video. There was never going to be an advert for that kind of job, because in its sense it's very hard to describe. The skill of the boy there is very complex, because it's not just the skill with the clay and the claymation or the technical skills in terms of lighting, set design and so forth. It's the caricature of me that he's able to generate, which makes it so lifelike and so engaging as a piece of work. And that combination of skills never gets put in an advert. But when people see it, they think that's exactly what I'm looking for. And it really highlighted for me one of the big challenges facing young people coming out of education now. Our government has a statistic, which is that 60% of the jobs young people in school today will do have not yet been invented. And I don't know how they came up with the statistic, but the premise is true, which is a very, very high proportion of the jobs that young people will do haven't been invented. And this creates a very big challenge for the paradigm of education, because education was designed to give young people the skills which they would need to do the jobs they were going to do once they left school. But if you have no idea what jobs the young people are going to do, what do you fill their time doing? And this is particularly true in an environment like the one I was describing, in which what the world is really looking for now is not job seekers, but job creators. I spend quite a lot of time talking to young people and explain this to them, is that when you come out of education now, it is far more likely you are going to have to invent a job that you do, and that you will have to then sell that job to employers, rather than you are going to see an advert for something and you're going to be able to fill that. So that is a huge change in the whole process of employment. And I'm not arguing at all that the purpose of education is simply to prepare people for employment, but it has to be an aspect of what education is doing. And it raises the question of what are the skills, what is the skill set that young people will need in order to survive in this new work environment. Because if you're not able to do that, you're facing a lifetime of unemployment or marginalisation, and ultimately that is not satisfying or satisfactory for our young people. But we should therefore think a little bit about what is happening in school today and the extent to which we think it is concerning itself with these issues. And here I want to look at some statistics looking at the international situation that we face in education. And I think that what most countries are facing is a breakdown in motivation and interest. There are different degrees to which education systems are honest about how serious a problem this is. Obviously, within education, there is a minority of children who study hard, work well, get qualifications and move on. But generally speaking, motivation, engagement and interest is diminishing amongst young people, and most teachers report that to me. To look at this from a particular angle, I think it's worth looking at PISA and the statistics which are collected in all the developing economies and some of the all the developed economies, rather, and some of the developing economies, looking at children's performance in science, mathematics and literacy. And I'm sure you all know about PISA, but for those who don't, it is a test in numeracy, literacy and science, which random samples of 15 and 16-year-olds in different countries sit. And it produces an average score for the children in each one of those countries. That then produces league tables in which the different countries can be compared. And when these are published, it tends to lead to vigorous debate in the media between politicians, either blaming politicians or politicians taking the credit for these changes. Now, what most people don't know is that in the addition to these tests, what the children are also asked to explain is how interested they are in the subject and how good they think they are at the subject. So interested is fairly obvious, but good, the PISA call self-concept. And when you then correlate interest and scores, a picture like this begins to emerge. So, for instance, you can see in this slide that along the bottom you have the scores. Going up the side you have how interested young people are in the subject, and the little black dots are actually the individual countries' average scores. And you can see at the far right of the image, the little black dot there being Finland, because everybody knows that Finnish children get the highest scores in these tests. But you can also see that they are the least interested in the subject. And this is a huge problem, because the reason there is such a focus on science in schools is because we desperately need more scientists. And therefore we hope that by making this a focus of education, we will end up with more scientists. But if the consequence of the pedagogy we deploy is pupils who do well in tests but have no interest in the subject, then this is completely counterproductive and undermines all our efforts. What we need is children who do well in test scores but are also interested. And you can see that the higher the test scores in a country, generally speaking, the lower the interest. And this reflects very badly on the way that schools are actually tackling these subjects. You can also see a similar pattern in self-concept. And what you see in self-concept on the left-hand side are countries like Japan and Korea. And these are the countries that do very well in tests, but where the children think they're very bad at the subject. And you think, well, how come if you get a high test score, you think you're bad at the subject? Well, if you go to Korea, and I've spent some time in Korea observing classes, you can see why. Young people in high school in Korea go to school from 7:30 in the morning to 5:30 in the afternoon. And then after that, they go to after school, where exactly the same curriculum is then repeated until 1:30 in the morning. Almost every single classroom I have been into in Korea has had children fast asleep at their desks. At the back of Korean classrooms, you will have these high tables with no chairs by them. And I said to a school director one day, why do you have these high tables at the back of your class? And he said, so children, if they want to, can stand up whilst they're taking their notes. I said, why would they want to stand if they could sit at the desk? And he said, because it's much harder to fall asleep when you're standing up. So the main focus of Korean education is to try and keep people awake through the course of the day, whilst they are taken through a very rote-driven and very knowledge-driven curriculum in order for them to pass their exams. But what happens is that when they do pass their exams, they don't think I did well. They think my teachers and my parents drove me through an education system in which I did well. And in fact, if I was clever, if I was good at these subjects, I probably wouldn't have had to work so hard, because I could probably have learned the subject by lunchtime, as opposed to having to go on till 1:30 in the morning before it finally sinks in. So that you get the test results, but without the self-belief. And that also feeds into young people thinking, I will not pursue a career in the science or with mathematics because I'm no good at it. And therefore, the pedagogy that you use in schools has to support interest and confidence in the subject, because otherwise it's not going to have the desired outcome. You can see this again when you look at PISA math scores and entrepreneurship. And as I said, these are all PISA slides, they're not ones that I made up. And what you can see here is in the orange are the math scores, and you have countries like Singapore and Korea and Taiwan and Finland with very high math scores, but the children have no sense of entrepreneurship. And this is a problem because we said in the economy of the future, what we want is job creators, not job seekers, and yet the higher the qualifications the children get, the less likely they are to be job creators. And you might argue, well, but this is a self-assessment, and they may in fact be terribly entrepreneurial, but they just don't know it. And you go, no, but it is deeply affecting their life choices. If you think you're not interested and you think you're no good at it, why would you then try and pursue a subject or an area of interest or a career and so forth? You're going to go for the ones that interest you and you think you are good at. And the counterpart is also true. You can see that in the case of someone like Einstein. Einstein was not a great student in terms of test scores. He only got a third-class degree at university and couldn't get a job at the university because his degree wasn't good enough. But he was so interested and so confident, he got a job as a clerk in a patents office, and he wrote his theory of relativity when he wasn't even in a university. But it was because he was so interested and confident, which are the most important things in terms of developing the talent. And again, I should stress, these are OECD slides, these are not my slides, but the OECD went on to look at youth suicide rates in correlation to test scores. And you can see in the case of science here, the higher the test score, the higher the suicide rates. And you get countries like Korea and Japan and Finland with very high test scores, but actually very high suicide rates. And again, when you talk to Korean educationalists about this, they acknowledge the problem. The OECD has written a report, especially on this aspect of the problem. And they report to me that it's not the children who come bottom who are committing suicide. It's the children and young people who come second and third. Because the point of the education system is to come first. There's no intrinsic interest or perceived value to the young person other than the exam result. And when you don't get the exam result that you want, then you feel absolutely despondent. Most young Koreans that I talk to in their 20s and 30s looking back on education can't even remember their teenage years. They say it was just a fog of exhaustion throughout those years. And so they have no sense that this was a valuable process to go through because they never enjoyed it, they didn't learn things that they thought they were interesting, they couldn't connect it with their real lives, it all felt very abstract and so forth. So if you don't even do well in the exams, what was the point of that? Now, similar things have been evident to us in our own research. So this is a piece of research that Cambridge University did for us, in which we studied 5,000 young people in English schools between the years, between grade 3 and grade 10. And what you can see in the first slide here is a measure of their well-being in terms of how good they were feeling. And you can see along the bottom you have which grade they're in, grade 3, grade 6, grade 8, grade 10. And on the left-hand side is how good they're feeling about their life. And what you can see very clearly is as they move through education, they feel less and less good. But the other measure of well-being that Cambridge University used was competence. How competent do you feel? This to us is the most important one because you want to give young people a sense of what we call agency, that they are in control of their lives and the decisions that they take are going to influence what happens to them. And that sense of agency will drive them through their lives onto success. And what you can see here very clearly is that in England, year 6 is the last year of primary school, and you then move to a big secondary school. And obviously between year 3 and 6 in primary school, you feel more competent because you're bigger, faster, know more than everyone else in the school. But you move to secondary school and immediately you have this dramatic decline in the feeling of competence. Here in this slide, blue is boy and green is girls, and it's not that this is different, this is an issue of self-reporting. Boys are more likely to report themselves as competent and girls more likely to underrate themselves, but the average is the truth. And if you stopped someone in the streets and said, you know, what do you think is the point of education? Most people would say, well, it's to produce competent young people. And if you said, well, actually, did you know that the longer young people are in school, the less competent they feel? They would say, well, we need to fix education. And our view is, we do need to fix education. It is not producing the results that we want. And at the heart of that problem is the pedagogy that we use in schools. So, how in our Creative Partnerships programme have we gone around and addressed this problem? Well, we start with schools applying to be in the programme, and we now have programmes in Wales, in Scotland, in Germany, in Norway, in Hungary, in Pakistan, and so forth. And schools apply, and they have to articulate a problem that they see in their school. And it's a school problem, so it could be maths in grade 2, or it could be literacy in grade 6, or it could be biology in grade 10, or it could be something else like boys' behaviour in the playground. And what we do is that we send a specially trained artist into that school to develop a project with the relevant teachers which addresses that particular problem. And what we find, and this comes out of all the research we do because we've been obsessed with research since we started and have done huge amounts of research, is what we find is that the learning environment which the teachers and the artists design within which to address this problem has a set of common characteristics which we call the high functioning or the high participation classroom. And really it looks like this. On the left-hand side, you have a more traditional style of education. On the right-hand side is a style of education that we encourage in schools. Now, it's really important to say at this particular point that we're not saying left is bad and right is good. What we're saying is we need a mixture of these two in any classroom. And if the left-hand side becomes over-dominant, which is true in many classrooms around the world, then you have problems and you need to have more of a mixture. But it is important to remember two things. Sometimes, if you are communicating knowledge, facts, and so forth, then the teacher just needs to talk and the pupils just need to listen. And secondly, you also must recognise that some young people are very passive learners. They like just to sit behind the desk, to listen quietly to what the teacher says, to make notes, to learn it off by heart, to regurgitate it in their exams. And those young people tend to do very well in the current system. And they pass their exams, and they go to university, and they all get degrees, and then they become teachers, and they come back to school and go, can't see what the problem is. And therefore, it is a challenge for quite a lot of teachers to understand that other people learn differently, and they need to have that mix if that is going to work. But what you have on the right-hand side is a set of characteristics which we think teachers should be thinking about all the time when they are designing their lesson plans. So the role of the teacher, right at the top there, in a more traditional classroom, it's very directive. What the teacher is effectively doing is leading the young person towards the answer. Whilst in the right-hand side, you have a style of teaching which is much more challenging. The teacher sets the challenge, the pupils have to go out and find the answers and develop strategies for finding that answer. Now, the researchers, when they were talking about this, talked about this issue quite a lot. One researcher, a professor of education at Nottingham University, followed around an intelligent young 14-year-old girl in school for a whole week, just watching what was happening in her school, in every single class. And what she was doing was noting down whenever she thought this child was actually learning something. And she calculated that over the course of a week, the girl did about 11 minutes of learning. The rest of the time, the teacher was telling something which the girl already knew, getting the boys in the back row to behave, making them sit down and be quiet, repeating for somebody who hadn't understood the first time the same thing again. And generally speaking, filling up that space with not learning. And the amount of learning is really key. And a key diagnostic that we would say to teachers is look around your class and go, for how many minutes was every child learning during that 45-minute or 1-hour class? Do that. But also the researchers pointed out that what happens with that very directive style of learning are two things. The brighter children work out that whatever the foreplay, if you like, the teacher's going to tell you the answer in the end. So it stops listening because they know that actually at some point the teacher's just going to go, well, here's the answer, and just waits for them to do it and then writes it down. The less able children never learn to do it for themselves. And in terms of coping with the adult world, what the child needs to learn is how to learn, and how they learn, and how to make that strategy effective. And if you constantly short-circuit that by giving them all the answers, then they never learn to do that. And then the other characteristics down that you can see is that time is in the room, organisation of the room is much more like a workshop than rows of people facing you. It's a very social way of learning because you're doing a lot of the time working in groups. But some of the ones that really interested me was this notion of learning being very visible. What the researchers said is that a lot of the time in school, learning is invisible. The teacher talks, the child writes notes. Whether those notes are any good or reflect whether the child has understood is never examined by anybody. The teacher is working on the premise that if I've said it, you understand it. The teacher sometimes sets an assignment, the pupil hands it in, the teacher knows what the assignment was like, but nobody else knows. And those are very invisible ways of monitoring learning. In a Creative Partnerships project, for instance, you might be doing maths, but what you're actually doing is using maths to build a big wooden structure in the middle of the playground, and if you get the maths wrong, the whole structure will collapse, and then not only your teacher, but the whole class and everyone else in the school is going to see that you got it wrong. Now, what the researchers argued is that highly visible learning is high-risk learning because failure is very visible. But they argue that high-risk learning is very motivating. It gets your adrenaline going, you get excited, you think, I don't want to be made to look stupid in front of everybody in the school. And so you make sure you get it right. And the engagement and motivation of the pupils are enormously higher. But also there's this concept of the self being a learning resource. And here what we mean is that the children's questions, their examples, their experiences are woven into the learning all the time. And it's therefore much more of a conversation between the teacher and the child. Children often say to us, we have this theory that if none of us turned up to class, the teacher would deliver exactly the same lesson. And when I say this to teachers often smile wryly, because they know it's probably true. They have a lesson plan, whatever happens, they're going to deliver it, and so forth. And the problem with that is that nobody likes to be somewhere they think they're not making a difference. And therefore, by being able to respond to a child's question, by being able to take the example that a child has come up with and use that in order to inform the learning, you are acknowledging the presence of all those young people in the classroom. And they feel that by turning up they made a difference. Because if they think that turning up to class is going to make no difference, they're not going to turn up to class. And so that's a really key aspect of building motivation. But also this whole question of emotion is really key. A lot of the time we like to feel that learning is an emotional free zone, and there are no emotional free zones in our life. Emotion is ever present. We say to teachers, if you're in a really bad mood, you should go to the class and go, you know what, I'm in a really bad mood today. And teachers say, I can't say that. And I go, why? And he says, well, I'd scare the kids if I said that. And I go, no, you don't get it. The kids already know that you're in a really bad mood. What they're worried about is why you're in a bad mood. Have they done something wrong? Are you cross with them? Are they going to be punished in some way and so forth? Whilst the moment you go, I'm in a really bad mood because I had an argument with my husband this morning, or I broke my car on the way to school and so forth, they all relax and go, now I understand why you're in a bad mood. And we can deal with it. I was talking to a group of children in the school the other day, and I said, is it important that teachers do creative things in class? And they all said, yes, it is. And I said, well, why is it important that teachers do creative things in class? And this boy said, he was about 14, he said, well, because when my teacher is doing her creative, when my teacher is teaching her normal stuff, she's got her grumpy face on. And when she's got her grumpy face on, I don't like to ask her any questions. But when she's doing her creative stuff, she's got her happy face on. And when she's got a happy face on, then if I don't understand, I ask. Now, what the boy is saying is, I alter my learning behaviour according to the mood that my teacher is in. Now, most teachers don't want to hear this. They want to think, whatever I teach, I've got my lesson plan, I just do it, they're going to behave exactly the same. It's not true. It's about a relationship, it's about emotion, it's about your relationship. And unless you can foreground that and make that a key part of what happens in the classroom, then the learning is not going to happen, because it's going to be undermined by the absence of that relevance, emotional relevance. And finally, there's this whole question of inclusiveness. What you need to do in the class is find a role for everybody. Everyone should have an entry point, and everybody should have an achievement point. And you can sit watching traditional classes, and you know that the teacher is teaching to this group of children who sit near the middle of the class. Along the back are a group of boys who long ago gave up on education, and the teacher doesn't bother with here. Down the sides are these intelligent kids who know it all already, and they don't even have to listen, and there's not that sense of inclusion for everybody, and there needs to be. Now, when you look at that high participation model and so forth, and you look down it, you immediately see that you're talking about arts education. It is impossible to do arts education without talking about emotion. It is impossible to be directive about arts education. It's about setting challenges. Their views, their perceptions of what's going on is key. It's a very social way of working. Of course, it's about the child's ideas and learning journeys and so on and so forth coming out through that process. So immediately within arts education, you have a learning environment which is very, very high functioning. And what you see when this happens is that the teachers watch this way of learning And when they watch it, they always see the same set of outcomes. They see better discipline, better motivation, better collaboration. All these things begin to happen within the classroom. And all those things are really important because that social emotional atmosphere is very central to learning. And teachers see that and go, this is what I want in my classrooms, and they therefore start to take it back to their own practice. And you see them take these ideas that they learned in this special place designed by the project, and they take it into everyday learning. And why this is important, and it's called the high-functioning classroom, so forth, is because in this learning environment, children are physically, socially, emotionally, and intellectually engaged. And when you have that, you have 100% of the young person in the classroom. And a lot of the problems that you have in school is only 25% of the child has turned up. The rest simply isn't with you. And you're never going to get deep learning when that is the case. But with physical, social, emotional, intellectual engagement, you have 100% of the child. And not only does the child feel good and feel confident, but you get high performance. Those are the conditions in which deep learning and real progress in academia really take place. So, what does this look like in practice? Well, let's take a couple of examples. This one is from Lithuania, where we had a program for 3 years, working in around 10% of all schools in Lithuania. And this is a photograph of a high-functioning classroom. Now, in this school, the school had said the problem they wanted us to focus on was literacy. The children were learning their letters and learning to read, and they were not making good progress. And could we help with that? So we sent a specially trained artist in to work with that teacher, and together they analysed the problem. And here we had a sound artist who was working with them, and the sound artist suggested that the reason the children weren't learning was because they were not listening properly, because letters exist as sound in the environment outside it. And if you can associate the letters with those sounds, you will learn them and you will memorise them. So on the first day of the project, the children just lay on the floor and listened to the school, which is what's going on here. And they listened to all the different sounds that they could hear, and they talked about it. And then they went out around town. So here they are at the railway station in town, and what they're doing is they're listening to all the sounds that exist at the railway station, and they're making notes. What their notes are is they're using letters to invent words which capture the sound that they have just heard. And here they're in a subway doing exactly the same thing. And here they're in an indoor market doing exactly the same thing. And what you can see very clearly in the photographs is the intense concentration from the children. They're really absorbed in this task of listening to sounds and inventing words. But what they're doing, I remember from primary school, is writing their letters. Good. It's very, very boring. But this approach has made it really, really interesting. An inquiry-based journey on which the children are. Here they are trying to listen to sculpture. There was a university in town, and we took the children to a Turkish lecture. None of the children were Turkish, had ever spoken Turkish before in their lives, but they had to sit in a lecture and they had to listen to Turkish and write it down as it went along. Then they come back into class, and here what they are doing is looking at the ideas they had, which are in their notebooks, which you can see on the table there, and taking the ideas, they're what we would call crafting and improving them, making them better ideas, so that each group comes up with a selection of the best ideas, which they write on a big sheet. And here's one of the sheets from one of the tables, and what you see at the top there is the word stotis, which is the Lithuanian word for station. And the first word underneath that is chetikas, and that is the word that that group of children came up with to capture the sound of a train coming into the station. Chetikas, chetikas, chetikas. So this is entirely what we would call onomatopoeia, but it's using letters all the time properly to reproduce those sounds to capture what you heard outside. And the project developed. So they're still working in groups. The children were allowed to select a painting and so forth, and they had to create a soundtrack for that painting, only using sounds that they could make with their mouths. And what they had to do with the soundtrack is to capture the feeling there. And this is one of the paintings that they selected, and this is the soundtrack that goes with it, and that what you can hear very clearly in that is that they're trying to capture the feeling of the slide, and they have the sea coming in, and in the background you can hear the whistling, which is the sound of the birds flying over. So they're trying to get all the sounds of the painting into the soundtrack while still capturing that feeling. And you can see, if we return to the diagram of the high-functioning classroom, that this was a challenge. It wasn't directive, it was very social, it was very physical, it was full of the children's ideas, it brought emotion into it, and so forth. So all these aspects were being incorporated in the learning, but they were still doing the core curriculum, which is learning their letters. So it hadn't deviated into some other area of the curriculum. It was using the arts at the heart of learning to use the techniques and approaches present there to make the learning more effective. So here's another video. It's in a secondary school. These are 14-year-old children, and they are a low-performing set in a big urban secondary school. And we were asked to work with them to improve mathematics, their attainment scores, in other words, their test scores in mathematics, by engaging them. And this video tells the story of what happened.
My name is Fiona Johnson, and I'm an animator, and I've been working with pupils at Harrow to engage them more in maths. So my part was to take over after the drama artist had actually worked with the children to look at different scenarios where math could actually take place. Then my job to take over that was to animate what they'd learnt. So we sort of created some dramas, and the animation part came in was to have some animation mixed in with the live action. So we took their graphs and their objects that they were animating. So for an example, one group were the Russian mafia, and their math problem was to drink as many shots of vodka as they could within a certain period of time. So they could measure the distance and speed of the vodka shot going from the table to the mouth, and how many they could consume in that time. So they had a bar, set the bar up, and actually did that as a drama. Then the graph was actually animated with little vodka glasses to actually show how fast they could drink those vodka shots and how many. So it was looking at distance and speed. So it was just a creative way of getting them to be able to recall math problems, and because they, through drama and video and animation, they have to repeat that process over and over again, it becomes much better for them to actually recall and solve those problems. So all in all, after a sticky start and a few frustrations, they were absolutely great. So they've now produced 4 short films that look at distance and speed and working with graphs.
Having experienced the processes of creating an animation, we decided to produce one in-house in order to illustrate more of the key concepts of the maths curriculum. As an arts college, we're fortunate to have the facilities to be able to do this, as can be seen from the following example.
Welcome to Maths News. Today's story is very exciting. There is a crisis in the farming industry. Due to the lack of space in the countryside, farmers are having to relocate hen coops. We now hand over to our exceptional reporter Alex, who is on the roof.
Thank you, Jasmine. We have been speaking to local eggs to find out exactly what has been happening.
It's cracking, mate.
I'm shell-shocked.
It's awful, just awful. Terrible, terrible, terrible.
We spoke to one of the relocated hens.
This is awful. 30 of my eggs have been scrambled on the pavement. I'd like to know what speed they fell at when they left that roof.
I spoke to an expert who had been working on the equation.
I used the equation distance divided by times equals speed. These were my findings.
The results show that the speed of the first egg drop was 9.8 metres per second. The second egg drop was 9.7 metres per second, and the third egg drop was 9.9 metres per second, giving an average of 9.8. In conclusion, the results show that the egg should stay in the country. This is Alex reporting for Maths News.
Today we did like a thing where one person was a teacher, like a perfect teacher, one was a perfect student, one was the lesson, and one was a perfect parent. And like we had to like say examples like what a perfect parent or something would be, and then we wrote it down and like stuck it on us like with post-it notes and that.
We decided as a group what makes a good maths lesson is that the teacher was good and did fun things and the work wasn't too hard, and the classroom was colourful and posters to help us with our maths. We've got a good maths teacher because he helps us with our work and gives us the right work for us, and he's fun and he makes us laugh.
This cohort of students have exceeded expectations, and in test results at the end of the project have achieved more highly than a top set Year 9 who were taught in a conventional maths setting. The Creative Partnership Initiative has reinforced the positive impact that using creative practices can have in maths, and we're looking forward now to developing this across other curriculum areas.
And again, you can see at the end of that that's very much a high-functioning classroom. It was about challenges, it was social, it was physical, it was emotional, it was exciting, and so forth. But the key thing about this is that at the end of the project, that group of children had to sit their maths test at the end of the year. And you have to remember this was the lowest performing group of children in that year. And at the end of the year, of having worked in this way, the average score of that class had not only improved, but it had become the highest score across all the sets in that year. So they were now outperforming the high-performing kids. And this was a huge shock to the school, because they were left with the challenge of going, if we can make the low-performing set the highest-performing set, are we really achieving the potential of the bright kids? And should we be expanding the learning techniques and the approach to learning which is going on in those sets as well, if we can make this amount of difference to the learning. That in essence is what we're trying to explore. What we're looking at is that the arts is not just another subject, it is a way of understanding and approaching the world. And that when you use the ways of learning that the arts open up fully across the school, it makes learning deeper and more profound in all the areas within which it operates. And this is why it is so important to have the arts at the heart of education, in every place that the children are, because that is what is going to result in young people performing to their full potential, in improving results and attainment in those schools, but also in developing the skills in young people that they will require in order to succeed in employment and work in the 21st century.